Hello everyone, I am KMacPhail of the University of Minnesota Duluth, and I'm with you today to present my paper, Got to Hate Fences, Infrastructure and Anarchy in Lonely Are the Brave from 1962. What impresses me the most in returning to study this nearly 60-year-old film is how relevant it is and remains. The movie asks big questions regarding where America was going in the early 50s. It asks about the nature of individuality, of freedom, of independence, and even of a tendency towards anarchy over and against the increasing demands from the society at large, from the government, from the police, the military, industrial complex, and so on that tended to oppress these movements for individuality, at least as far as this film and its characters are concerned. Our film is set in Albuquerque, and the film's referred to as Duke City, of course, one of the nicknames of Albuquerque, and we're looking too at the broader context of the southern border of the United States during the 1950s. As we'll see, the film centers on Jack Burns, played here by Kirk Douglas, who is a cowboy and also a bit of an anarchist, and he's defined by his freedom and independence that he holds on to for dear life as a kind of a representative, iconic figure of the Old West, which simply does not fit into the New West that's developing. He's also defined by his loyalty to his few friends, the closest of which probably is his 3-year-old mare, a horse named Whiskey that we'll see a few pictures of in a moment, but also to Jerry and to Paul Bondi, older friends of his. They will give us really the crux of the problem in which we find Jack Burns entering. Paul has been put in prison. He's sentenced to go to a federal penitentiary for the crime of helping out these undocumented immigrants, these illegal aliens, according to the government, of course, who have come across the Mexican border into New Mexico. Paul does not actually ferry people or transport them across the border. That's not his crime at all. But once the people are there, he sees them as the proverbial neighbor whom he must help, and he does help them by hiding them on occasion, giving them a place to sleep for a couple of nights, by giving them food, directions, even advice upon where to find work. Now, to Jack Burns, this obviously is exactly what one should do. We have duties to these other folks. He says at one point that Paul's actions are not illegal. He says simply that, quote, people sneak across the border, but still they're people, and so Paul helps them, unquote. That's his very succinct justification, an ethical concern for how he sees Paul as acting in the right, acting as an individual, but as a part of this wider community over and against the claims of the government. Now, a part of the genealogy of this film is that it comes from an original novel called The Brave Cowboy, and the subtitle is An Old Tale in a New Time from 1956. And it was, in fact, a very early novel, the second novel written by Edward Abbey, who, as I'm sure you all know, is very well regarded for environmental classics like Desolate Solitaire from 1968, and probably his best-known text, The Monkey Wrench Gang from 1975. So to have this novel that makes such an important statement regarding immigration, regarding the wider human community, it's interesting that we begin with this novel by Edward Abbey. To these areas of national and environmental crises is added yet another layer of crisis represented by the film's screenwriter Dalton Trumbo, the well-known Hollywood 10 figure who fought against the blacklist with Douglas during America's paranoid Red Scare of the Cold War. Part of the reason probably why Trumbo and Abbey both are so geared into this script is because of the character of Paul Bondi, who is only the friend of Jack Burns, but he's so Trumbo-like, the guy who is in fact in prison for helping these immigrants, these people who have crossed the border. He has a passion for justice. It's important to note probably right off that Abbey's novel has Bondi in prison for refusing to give his accord and to sign up for the 1948 version of the Selective Service Act. Now, Trumbo, the big change that he makes is that he changes Bondi's crime from this problem with refusing to register for the draft to, in the first draft of the screenplay, Trumbo pretends that what Bondi's crime had been was simply not to testify to a grand jury, which of course is what Trumbo had done with the House Committee on Un-American Activities. And so for Bondi, the actual crime was smuggling of parrots across the border, but then widely he won't testify to the grand jury. So the studio, of course, they won't go along with that, so he makes it the harboring of these illegal immigrants from Mexico. Now, as we turn to look more at some of the stills from the film itself, a number of threads will arise that deal with exactly these themes. The cowboy, at least this one, as an anachronistic throwback to an earlier generation, yet his expression of freedom and individualism. We see some motifs of the hero that emerge in the plot line. We see again and again his relationship with the horse, representing his loyalty. We see his journey, the struggle to get over the mountain. And yes, this big question of power in society. Who belongs, who's indigenous, who can remain, who must be turned back from a line drawn on a map. And even the idea of era and power. Who will survive, who will continue. The opening shot, as you see here, is off this wide open space in New Mexico. Many Western films will use this, a very, very common type of opening scene. We quickly move down to a campfire, to a boot, up the leg, until we get to this cowboy who's dozing in the early morning, smoking a cigarette. He sits up, we see his Kirk Douglas, and we know that we are in a good old-fashioned Western movie, right? We know exactly what genre it is that we're looking at until there is this weird sound. We see Kirk Douglas looking off into the distance, and what is his POV? It is, of course, these three military Air Force jets who are streaming across the New Mexico sky. So it's such an effective opening scene because for the first moments, we are sure we're in just another Western movie. So we're probably in the 1860s, but then with the jets, we know that we're in fact in the jet age, and we jump 100 years into the future very quickly. It's quite clear that we're meant to read this throwback to an earlier way of life as a throwback to an earlier form of America and an earlier form of ethics. Definitely the biggest motif of the whole of the film is the fence or the boundary or the border. Right? Again, think of the illegal immigrants crossing the Mexican-U.S. border. Here we have our cowboy coming across a long fence of barbed wire, multi-strand, three-strand, and it's, of course, a closed area from the Water and Power Company of Albuquerque. He will deal with this very quickly, although we see this fence spanning in both directions for miles. There's no way around it, so of course he wants to go through it. And as you'll note here, we are still in the opening credits, so we've learned a lot. Everything we need to know about this cowboy was seen pretty quickly. The next boundary comes to, of course, is the big river, and on the other side we see Albuquerque stretching, and more mountains on the other side. The biggest boundaries will become the highways, and they act as somewhat bookends. So now we're past the opening credits. We find a 4-lane highway, and the question is how the cowboy, how his skittish young horse are going to get through it. And of course, as you can imagine, it's not going to go easy. There are several near accidents, near misses, as he tries to get whiskey across this 4-lane highway into the city itself. A great shot here of a large truck that's nearly collided with the horse and rider here in the side view mirror. Of course, he will give his mount a talking to on the other side of the road. Very importantly, in the background, what do we see? Nothing more than a big collection of these rusted out cars, which are no longer of any use. He follows this alleyway down into the main city of Albuquerque, going to visit Jerry and Paul. On one side, we see an actual graveyard. On the other, the car graveyard. So immediately a symbol of this commercialism. At this point, something that we do find in Abbey that Trumbo continues are intercalary chapters. We have a number of trucks stopped here at a truck stop, and we're going to follow this one truck that has bathroom fixtures within it. So basically, this trucker is hauling toilets from the north down to Albuquerque, which is his destination. The driver will be Carroll O'Connor in his first film role. Burns will get to Jerry, to the wife of his friend Paul, who is in prison, in her modern kitchen, as you see here. Right, they have all the amenities, 2 frying pans, which you will cook some breakfast for him. They will start to discuss how Paul got into his difficulty. Now, the argument of the film becomes what we've seen earlier. There is an applauding of Paul for his decision to go against the government and helping these immigrants and migrants across the border, these different refugees. Likewise, Burns, who is a spiritual anarchist, he breaks through barriers again and again and again. He cuts through that barbed wire fence. He saws through prison bars a little later on, as we'll see in a second with a smuggled hacksaw. Ultimately, he'll go through this impassible mountain range with his horse to get to the Mexican border and escape himself, and reversing that migration. For him, as he says in this discussion with Jerry in the kitchen, it's a particular characteristic of what he fears is a disappearing American ideal. Quote, "A Westerner likes open country. That means he's got to hate fences. And the more fences there are, the more he hates them." Of course, the question is whether the open borders and open land too that Burns is trying to suggest is truly the American ideal will have a chance to survive in this modernized, commercialized world. And the answer, of course, will eventually be no, but he, as this anarchist, spiritual anarchist at least, is someone who will try to fight back against it. How will he continue? Well, he decides that he must break into prison in order to break Paul out of prison. This will be somewhat of a subplot, but it will lead to the longer chase scene, which will dominate the crux of the film itself. Now, most of the police officials that we find are caricatures. This one that we see here is very officious. He is mainly concerned that Burns has no identification. He says, "You mean to say that you got no identification at all?" That's right. He is replied to by Burns, "No draft card, no social security, no discharge, no insurance, no driver's license, no nothing." He keeps rhyming off these cards that Burns should have as an American citizen. No nothing, replies Burns. Now, he will reply that you can't go around without any identification. It's against the law. How are people going to know who you are? He replies, "I don't need identification cards to figure out who I am. I know already." And Burns himself, the hero of the movie, is a paperless American, and for that reason, he's going to push back against any of these traditional institutions. Moving to the jail, we follow Jack Burns, in which he is able to define Paul Bondi eventually. Here they are finally talking, discussing the plans that Jack has to break Paul out of prison. Now, we've met a number of different law enforcement officials, but at this point we met Gutierrez, who is played by the well-known George Kennedy. He is the sadistic and cruel guard who will mercilessly beat Jack Burns in the middle of the night for giving him back talk at one point. But nonetheless, his plan goes forward. The only people who go along with him are these 2 Navajo men who are in for a longer stretch, but they do not like the prison. It's a terrible place, of course, and they are eager to escape as they do. Paul Bondi will not. He knows that if he does escape and if he gets caught, then he will serve 5 more years on top of the 2 that he's being sentenced to already for assisting these Mexican immigrants. So he will remain in the prison. Finally, we have now a new set of complications for Jack Burns. Here with whiskey, he must get over these tall Sandia mountains. And if he can do that, then he knows he can escape all the way to Mexico. So we have this inherent irony that he must escape the United States to head into Mexico for freedom. Not, of course, from other Americans, but from the authority of American bureaucracy. One of the climaxes of the chase will come with that sadistic prison guard who sees the horse tied and sneaks up upon it, knowing that he is going to be able to shoot Burns dead when he comes back to the horse. Of course, unbeknownst to him, Burns is wise to what's happening and sneaks up behind him with that Winchester. Simply knocks him unconscious, allows him to survive. For me, one of the big challenges for Burns as a hero will be enacted at this point. The rope that the prison guards climbed down on, it's still there. You can see how steep that cliff is. There's no way, obviously, that he could even walk up this cliff without the rope, the help of it. So he knows at this point that he can climb this rope. He will be free. There's no other guards or anyone else at the top right near him. So he knows that this is his way to freedom. From the ground, Sheriff Johnson is urging him on at this point. He's even cheering for him to make it. And Johnson knows, as does our hero Burns at this point, that if he leaves the horse, that he will be able to escape scot-free and will be fine. So Burns, in fact, he will take the temptation. He will start climbing the rope, at which point we get a closer view of good old Whiskey, who is looking at him. And it's a challenge, right? It's a very, very humorous part of the movie. Will Jack continue on to freedom, or will he stay here with the horse that obviously can't climb the rope, as he says to her at one point? This is one scene as our character is trying to weigh his freedom versus his loyalty to the horse. He, in the end, will choose, of course, to stay with Whiskey. Finally, in the last minutes, we're in a deep, dark, pouring rain at night, and we come to that last highway, and we start to cross it, and of course, in the distance, we see coming that toilet truck driven by Carol O'Connor. Heavy rain, we know from the novel that he's on types of amphetamines to keep himself awake. He can't see, it's dark at night. He'll blow the air horn when he sees the horse in the middle of the highway, which does not help the horse whatsoever, and of course, he will hit both horse and Burns. Mercifully, I would say, for most of the sequence, we have people in heavy raincoats, and so we can't actually see Whiskey as she dies and struggles. Different people are put in that position, so we can't see what occurs. However, when the cops come, everything will stay very officious. The driver, he has some concern for the horse as well as for our character, Jack Burns, but he's not able to truly express it. It's a moment without any humanity at all. The policeman is simply concerned with getting a report from the truck driver regarding what occurred. A problem with the ending that's left up in the air certainly is whether Burns is turned in, and in fact whether he dies at the end. The sheriff will not admit that this is the person he's looking for, even though in the novel, once again, the police are sure that they have their fugitive at this point. For us, the viewer, we're very concerned with Jack Burns. He doesn't speak. Mercifully, there's no soundtrack at this point. It's just the sound of the rain and the horse, who is slowly dying until she is shot. Kirk Douglas, his face becomes very, very ashen at this point. And our last shot, indeed, is off the hat worn by Jack Burns, as it's here so close to crossing this last boundary into freedom and into the individual. As he's not taken down, in fact, he's not taken down by the state, by the police or the military. He's taken down by toilets, by a man hauling toilets, this symbol of American commercialism and modernization. For them, the kernel of meaning here, the argument, is one that says much regarding what it means to be a spiritual person, to be an American, to be someone who lives in true individualism and freedom. In the words of Edward Abbey, that he writes to himself as a young man when he's on a Fulbright scholarship in Scotland, God help me, right? I will never sacrifice a friend to an ideal. I will never betray a friend for the sake of any cause. I will never reject a friend in order to stand by an institution. Great nations may fall in dusty ruin before I will sell a friend to save them. I pray to the God within me to give me the power to live by this design. Now, these are precisely the words and the sentiments that Abbey later put into the voice of Paul Bondi in his jailhouse discussion with his spiritual anarchist companion, Jack Burns. These too are the sentiments that Jack Burns lives by. And even though the film certainly does not have a happy ending. We can read in it nonetheless, I think, some small victory for the spiritual nature of the individual alone who faces up to the dehumanizing effects of a modern commercialized America, defined by closed borders, by bureaucratic numbering, by unfeeling institutions, and by the ever-increasing government control of the homogenized masses. Thank you.